There's also a few other notes within ED Notes so that you can interact with the whiteboard. Often our patients leave voluntarily before we've seen them. This gives you a chance under the no answer voluntary walkout note to document that that happened. You can say that the patient voluntarily walked out. If you select this option, the patient will fall off the whiteboard and their chart will close. If you select no answer, it asks you what time the patient didn't answer, and it documents it there. If you do this no answer note 3 times, or if 3 different providers do this note, it will automatically take the patient off of the whiteboard. I'm going to do this a 3rd time to demonstrate that. You see that it says patient called 3 times without response, to please change the whiteboard display to document that the patient has left and remove them from all whiteboards. When you do 3 no answer walkouts, the computer also asks you, is this a patient that was competent to leave, or do you need to fill out an elopement form? I'm going to say no, and when I accept, the patient will fall off of the whiteboard. You can see that our patient is no longer on our whiteboard. Often our patients walk back in within 2 hours, and instead of opening a new chart, what you can simply do to update that is that you can put them back on the whiteboard by hitting whiteboard display. I'm going to say the patient is actually now back in the ED, they returned, and that I want to put them back on the whiteboard. You'll notice that that repopulates the patient onto our whiteboard. Here they are. Whatever your workflow currently is, that's the way it will remain. So if you're in the pediatric emergency department, you'll notice that the patient remains on your whiteboard as discharged to home, and the time that they've been waiting to be discharged displays here. Once the nurse discharges the patient, she can come back onto the whiteboard, into QuadraMed, and document that the patient has left. So she would say, patient left the ED. And our patient will drop off our whiteboard. There's also a couple of other notes within here that you can use to interact with a patient. There's a note that says assign team and location. This is something that we expect that our PCTs will be doing, and in the future our volunteers will have access to this note so that they can update the patient's team in real time. For instance, if this patient was originally located on Team 1 and now requires respiratory isolation and is being moved to Team 2, I can document that by saying Team 2, and I'm going to put him or her in the AES Room B, Isolation Room B. And you'll notice that that will also update the whiteboard. Since I'd removed this patient, I'm going to put them back in the ED so that you can see what happens when the board is refreshed. Our patient checkout, which was initially on Team 1, which was red, has now been updated to Team 2. This assigned team location is also going to be used to move patients that are trauma patients to the EW whiteboard, and also to move patients that may be in the resuscitation bay back onto an original team. This will also be the place where patients in urgent care that are upgraded, or patients that are brought in after urgent care closes, this will be used to update their team as well. Again, this is where you, note edit correction is where you come back to make an edit to your note, and it's also the place where the attending enters to sign a resident note. The ED reports and whiteboard functions on the side are very standard. The master post-triage whiteboard is the big whiteboard that's displaying. When you click into it, it'll ask you which teams you want to see. The patient arrival whiteboard is mainly a whiteboard that will be used by the triage nurses. It lets the triage nurses know which patients are waiting to be triaged still. Part of this new EMR requires that we have a greeter nurse at the front, and you'll notice in medical walk-in that there's a new greeter desk located where a nurse will ask a brief chief complaint of the patient so that we can determine whether the patient can wait in medical walk-in for urgent care or whether they should be brought back to the main emergency department right away. This patient arrival whiteboard is the whiteboard generated by the greeter nurse. Many of you will not need to interact with this. You will only need to see the master post-triage whiteboard. There's also a report here if you want to print new labels for the patient. The last three are reports that may be helpful to you. The discharge report that prints when you discharge a patient, for instance, if the printer is not working or if there was no toner and you want to reprint it, this is where you would reprint it. If you'd selected a disposition of transfer for the patient, it would have asked you the appropriate transfer questions that are located on our inter-hospital transfer form. So if you want to reprint that transfer form, you can print it here. The current visit report is a report that's built in so that you can see all the notes that were written for a patient while they were here. What this does is gives you a brief summary of everything that happened for a patient. So if I'm an attending and I want to review all the nursing notes and all the documentation that has been done so far for the patient, I can do that. As you see here, it's in chronological order. The patient was brought into ED triage. The note is here. The nurse thought that they were very sick, so she didn't write anything else, and noted that this patient was an ESI level 1. The nurse on the team did an initial assessment, and here's her triage note. The location for the patient was changed. The resident saw the patient. Here's their note. The resident put in a progress note here, and then put in a disposition note. And you can see the other no answer walkout notes as we had completed them during our demo. So this allows you to have a quick summary access to all the notes that were written for the patient. Again, the tracking report that's located at the bottom for every patient lets you see everything that's been done for a patient, what time they actually arrived, when the triage was completed, when the provider had assigned themselves to the patient. This is exactly why we want you to use the provider assignment function, because we will be tracking the amount of time it takes a provider to see or sign up for a patient. The initial note for the nurse, the initial provider note, the disposition note, and when the SBAR handoff occurred, and what time the patient physically left our unit. So this has been a summary of all the ED notes, all the ED reports, and the patient tracking. When a patient becomes an inpatient, their desktop will no longer look like this. So if you want to access the ED notes for a patient that's already been admitted, I'll show you how to do that now. I'm going to select this patient, which is still an ER patient. Let's find a patient that is an inpatient. This patient, Kim Test, as you can see here in the top right-hand corner, is an inpatient. And you'll notice that their desktop looks entirely different than for an ER patient. However, if Kim Test is located in the emergency department and has been assigned an inpatient team, and I want to make orders for that patient, under order entry, you'll notice a new tab that says order entry for ER patients. Also, in Other Services tab, here, you'll notice that the ED documentation has been moved here. So if you still want to interact with the ED patient that's been admitted, you can do so here. The last function that you need to know about is sign out. If you're a resident and you're signing out, you will do it the same way that you do it as an attending. You'll notice that your active patients that you've signed up for are located here under My Patients tab, or you can go simply to the AES team that you're on and select your patients manually there. Keep in mind, we're not going to be using this feature down here that says sign out. We're going to be using the reassign function. So if I'm about to sign out at 4 p.m. and I want to sign out patient checkout to the next attending or to the next provider, I'm going to click reassign, click on the patient, and then it'll ask me who I want to reassign that to. You can do this one patient at a time, or you can select multiple patients by holding Control on the keyboard. I want to reassign these patients to Dr. Manko. see Jeffrey Manco pops over here. And when I click OK, the patient falls off of my list and goes to Dr. Manco's list. As you can see, having done the sign out feature, the whiteboard also updates to notify you that Dr. Manco is now responsible for the patient. Any notes, any future lab results will be pushed forward to Dr. Manco instead of Dr. Gulati. Many of you have asked what happens when a note is accidentally assigned to a provider. So if I'm patient checkout and I go into the note edit correction section and I see that there's a note that's been pushed forward to me that's not mine, you can reassign that note just like you would during sign out. You would go to the home screen, click on the patient, and reassign the note to the next attending. Since this is the development environment, this feature is not working. In the production environment, you'll be able to reassign the note forward to the patient, to the next attending. Or you can go into the patient, to note edit correct, click on the note, document that you're going to change the attending name over to Manco. And this will push forward to Dr. Manco's homepage. This is asking me for the attending attestation, and when I'm done, this note will be pushed forward to Dr. Manco. It's fallen off of my board. Had I done that in the sign out, it would have done the same thing. The last thing to keep in mind is that since we are now going to be entirely electronic, including order entry and documentation, that there may still be paper that exists for a patient. The clerical staff will have folders located in a file for all the patients in alphabetical order. If you want to look for a patient, for a referral paperwork for a patient, you can access it by looking for the file folder next to the clerk. We're also expecting that the clerk staff will start scanning documents within the computer. So things like ambulance run sheets, referral paperwork, referral EKGs, and timeouts will be housed within Quadramed. If you want to access those, you'll go to Chart Review, and you'll go to the section that says Scanned and Imported Data. This is where we will be putting images of pressure ulcers for the patient, and it'll also be where we scan documents into the computer. We recognize that for patients that are critically ill, you may need to grab the paperwork from the clerk so that you can review it to take care of the patient. However, when you are done, please hand any and all paperwork that belong in the patient's chart to the clerk so that they may scan it in real time. This concludes the training video for ED notes and documentation.